So if you've ever used an AI coding assistant, you know the feeling, right? One minute it feels like you have superpowers. The next it's just this frustrating mess. So why does it get so lost all the time? Well, it turns out the problem isn't always the AI, it's how we're talking to it. Today we're going to break down two totally different ways of working, vibe coding versus what's called the spec-driven approach, to figure out which one actually helps you build reliable software.
I mean, it always starts out like pure magic, doesn't it? You just toss it a simple prompt, something like build me a login component with an email and a password field, and boom, seconds later you've got working code. That speed, it's just addictive. You feel like you're flying through tasks that used to take hours.
But then, it happens. You ask for a tiny change, like, hey, can you add some password validation? And out of nowhere, it completely forgets the styling on the email field. Or maybe you ask for an error message, and it decides to rewrite the entire component from scratch, breaking something else. Suddenly, the magic is gone, and you're just stuck in this endless, tedious negotiation. So what is actually going on here? Is the AI just bad at remembering stuff? Is the context window too small? And yeah, those things are part of it, for sure. But the real problem isn't the technology itself, it's our workflow. The fix isn't about getting a smarter AI, it's about us getting smarter about how we communicate our goals.
You know, there's actually a name for this whole problem: intent to implementation deviation. It's all about that growing gap, that disconnect between what you had in your head and what the AI actually ended up with after a dozen back and forths. This isn't just some random bug. It's a sign that your whole process has kind of lost the plot.
Okay, so first, let's talk about the approach most of us naturally fall into. It's called vibe coding. And look, it's popular for a reason. It's fast, it's intuitive, and when you first start, it feels incredibly productive.
And this vibe coding loop, well, it's pretty much exactly what it sounds like. You give a prompt, the AI generates some code, you take a look, and then you iterate with another prompt. You're basically just having a chat, right? It's a really fluid process that's all about one thing: keeping that momentum going, always moving, always getting something new on the screen.
But, and this is a big but, there's a hidden cost. See, with every single prompt, the AI is making these little guesses, these implicit assumptions to fill in the blanks. And each one of those assumptions becomes another fragile layer in a big tower of unspoken rules. It's like a house of cards. One wrong move later on and the entire thing can just come tumbling down.
And this quote right here, man, it just nails what happens in the end when you try to vibe code a complex project. You're not the director anymore, you're a micromanager, constantly having to remind the AI of stuff it should already know. You're not really building anymore, you're just fighting to keep that original idea alive.
Okay, so if that's the problem, what's the solution, right? Well, it's a totally different way of thinking. It's a more structured, more professional approach called spec-driven development. The whole idea is different. Instead of just jumping into code, you make it a priority to get crystal clear on what you want before you even start.
So this approach, SDD for short, it breaks everything down into 4 clear phases. First, you figure out what you're building, the requirements. Then, you decide how you're going to build it, the technical design. Only after that do you break it down into smaller tasks, and finally, you get to the build phase. It's way more deliberate. And really, those first 2 phases are where the real magic happens. This is the big shift. Before a single line of code gets written, you're creating a detailed blueprint. The what defines your goal. Like, I need a user profile page where they can edit their avatar. The how lays out the technical plan, the data model for the user, the exact API endpoints to call, you name it.
Okay, so once you've got that blueprint, the next 2 steps, task and build, they become incredibly precise. Your prompts aren't these vague, hopeful requests anymore. No, they're laser-focused instructions like, create the API service to fetch user data from this specific endpoint, or build the React component that displays the user's name and email. Every step is small, you can check your work, and it's all tied back to that spec. You're not hoping it works, you're engineering it to work.
Now, I know exactly what some of you are probably thinking. Hold on, isn't this just old-school waterfall development? Isn't this just slow? What about being agile? And that's a fair question, but it kind of misunderstands what the spec is for in this new world with AI.
You know, the best way to think about this is to look at something called behavior-driven development, or BDD. The whole point of BDD was never to write perfect, rigid documents. It was to force a structured conversation between the business folks and the tech folks. It's the same idea here. The spec isn't a contract you just hand off. It's the framework that lets you have a clear, productive conversation with your AI partner.
I love this idea of the spec being like scaffolding for a building. You put it up to make sure the structure is built correctly, right? It provides support and a shared understanding for both you and the AI. And once the feature is built, the scaffolding's done its job. It's all about locking down your intent so it doesn't get lost in translation between you and the machine.
So what we're left with are two totally different philosophies, two different ways to work. You've got vibe coding, which is all about that initial burst of speed, and then you have spec-driven development, which is all about long-term alignment with your original goal.
And this slide, I think, really lays it all out perfectly. You've got vibe coding on one side. That's kind of the scenic, winding road. It's great for quick prototypes or maybe a one-off script or just when you're exploring an idea. The big risk? You might not end up where you thought you were going. And then you have a spec-driven development. That's the straight shot, the highway. It's for production-ready code, for working in teams where clarity is everything. The only risk is that you have to invest a little time planning up front.
So if you take away just one thing from all of this, let it be this. The real key to working successfully with AI isn't about how smart the model is. It's about how well you manage your own intent. Do you let your goal drift and then desperately try to pull it back on track? Or do you define it, stabilize it, and then build against it with total precision?
And that really brings us to the final question you have to ask yourself for your next project. Are you building for right now, or are you building for the future? Look, if you just need something quick and dirty, a little Vim coding session is probably fine. But if you're building something real, something that needs to last, something that your future self or a teammate is going to have to understand and maintain, then taking the time to write a clear spec isn't just extra work, it's the only way to build for long-term success.